I have a question. So you and Dr. Daniel Wallace or David Wallace, I'm sorry, one or the other, have really gotten me into textual criticism. Like I'm knee deep in it, and I love it, and I want to learn more, read more. And so I'm asking around, looking at places of what I should read, but obviously it's not just Orthodox people who do textual criticism. Liberals do it too. And so I'm looking at Bruce Metzger's book, Text of the New Testament, and I see Bart Ehrman's name on it, and, I'm like, oh, Bart Ehrman.
Right.
And so I just want to ask you, is that a good book to read? Or if you could at least, give me a book or maybe a few books for someone who really wants to dive, in the deep end of textual criticism, what would you say?
Well, yeah, better be careful about the deep end, because the deep end can be a very, very expensive end. Okay. Seriously, there's a series of books that give you a tremendous amount of textual critical information that Munster put out a number of years ago. They're still extremely useful, and they average like $380 a volume. That's when I say it can get deep. That's there. Now, what you're looking at with the Metzger book is Ehrman was Metzger's last doctoral student, and so when he did his last editing for the 4th edition, that's how Ehrman's name got on that. I obviously prefer the 2nd or 3rd edition, even though they're more dated, because I would be concerned about Ehrman's influence at that particular point, even though I would say that Ehrman's views probably were not as negative at the time he was doing that work as they would become only a few years later. So it's not like that book is going to kill you, but obviously there would be a little more concern that you would have. So if you can get the 3rd edition, then you don't have to worry about it. But obviously anything, right now, when people ask about textual critical stuff, there's more than we've ever had in the past. But at the same time, we are in the middle of a revolution. And I try to explain this to people, and some people get upset about it, and the vast majority of people just don't understand it. When I say we're in the middle of a revolution, I'm talking about CBGM, and I am pointing out that so far, CBGM has only been applied to Acts and to the general epistles. Mark is done. I was told that a year ago by the person that's in charge of it, but hasn't been published yet. I was really hoping it would be published back in November. Really need it. But John is being worked on. Mark is done. You're going to have, obviously, Matthew, Luke. You've got the Pauline Corpus. I think the last thing that's going to be done is going to be Revelation, because it's such a wild mess. I don't even know how it's going to work. But the point is that we're in the middle of a revolution. And even when the ECM is done, and you can purchase the already published ECM volumes, Acts is 4 volumes, General Epistles were a couple volumes, $300 pop. Not each volume, but for like Acts was like $320, something like that for the volumes. Okay. Even when that's done, that just means that it's now out and can now be discussed, which means there's going to be a revision over time. And so that's going to impact the Nescialin 29th, Nescialin 30th, Nescialin 31, because the manual editions that we have, specifically UBS and Nescialin, simply reflect the ECM. So the ECM is the master text, and they are the shorter, easier to carry around versions of what's in the ECM. So the only difference between 27th and 28th edition of Nescialin was the general epistles came out, and therefore in that section of the Nescialin, you had to show the changes to the ECM. So the 29th edition, I'm assuming they're going to hold that off until you at least have Mark and Acts. We already got Acts, maybe Mark, maybe John, so that there's enough changes to make it worthwhile to even do a whole new typesetting and a whole new printing of something like that. So that ECM, which once it's published will probably be minimally 40 volumes. It'll be huge, but it's being published online as well, which is good. You can access the ECM at the Munster website today, as much of it has been done, anyways. So you've got all of that stuff out there, and what that means is Metzger's stuff, as important as it is in laying a historical grounding and all the rest of the stuff, is if you've read his textual commentary is constantly soaked with the terminology of Alexandrian, Western, Byzantine, so on and so forth. CBGM is challenging the existence of those categories other than the Byzantine. And so,
oh wow!
So what are you going to do? I mean, there is a sense in which almost everything currently in print is outdated in light of that, and will become more and more outdated as the next portions of the ECM are released. So you have to keep all of that in mind, and you have to keep in mind the fact that you have people who don't like CBGM or are pushing back against CBGM. The Tyndale House Greek New Testament behind me there is somewhat of a pushback against CBGM. So things are in a state of flux, and so if what happens is people read particular individuals, they get into Eldon Epp or something like that. If you look online at the Brill website, you'll find lots of books on textual criticism, and lots of them are extremely helpful. But they average between $160 and $320 per volume, because they're almost always purchased by universities and libraries. If you've got a good university nearby, then you can get those books without having to spend that kind of money. If you don't, then it can be somewhat of a challenge. There's lots of that stuff out there, but in my opinion, you always have to keep in mind where we are right now and where it's going. And that means that you're going to read stuff and go, okay, that's how we used to refer to things, but we're not going to be able to be doing that in the future. So you take some things with a grain of salt. This conclusion you can't necessarily come to, so on and so forth. So it's a challenging time. It's challenging because it's a good time, but it is a challenging time. I'm sure you've seen. My goodness, this is like the fourth time this person is called. I am really gonna have to pick that one up. Let me reach over here a second and have some music playing and Okay. Obviously, you'll want to pick up the Myths and Mistakes in New Testament Textual Criticism. Elijah Hickson, Peter J. Gurry.
It looks awesome.
Yeah, and and there's all sorts of. It's helpful because it has all sorts of different perspectives that you have to weigh and consider, and that doesn't necessarily mean that every article is equal to every other article as far as its balance and things like that's concerned. But a lot of good up-to-date information that is extremely helpful as well. And then, of course, anything like this is going to eventually have normally at the end. Yeah, there's how many pages? Ooh, that's a big bibliography in that baby, and bibliographies are the book buyer's dream. That's where you get so much of your good stuff. So if you see a particular source,
my wife is going to try to block me away from that part.
I imagine so she may just rip it right out of there. I get it. But yeah, check the notes in the bibliography. That's gonna be a really good source for stuff like that. Okay.
All right. Thank you, Dr. White. You have a wonderful, blessed day.
All right. God bless.